Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And today I'm reviewing a film that's currently in theaters. The movie that I'm referring to is the 2025 film The Running Man, directed by Edgar Wright and based off of the Stephen King slash Richard Bachman novel. So the first thing I'm going to do is address what I was just referring to. If you aren't aware of the fact, there is actually no author named Richard Bachman. That was actually just a fake name that Stephen King was using so he could produce a few more books during each year, as he was kind of being limited when he first started off. Now, more than likely, you are probably aware of the 1987 film that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger that was also called The Running Man. That was loosely based off of the book as well, and this is now a remake and a little bit closer of an adaptation to that original source material. So let me tell you more about the concept here to see if this is a movie that you want to go and check out for yourselves. So this story takes place in 2025 during a somewhat dystopian future, where the rich have now become mega rich and everyone else is pretty much poor or barely above that level. We meet our main character of Ben Richards, who is going through a really rough time as he can't seem to get a job due to the fact that even though he did the right thing, he ended up messing things up at his last job and that kind of blacklisted him. To make matters worse, Ben's daughter is very sick. Whether or not it's just the cold or a flu or something worse, it's hard to tell because getting actual help and, of course, getting the right medications is so very costly in this world. It begins to look like there's no other options for Ben and his wife on being able to make money and take care of their daughter and, of course, themselves. So Ben makes the decision to do the only thing he thinks he has left, which is a tryout for one of the reality television series game shows that are extremely dangerous but have a high potential of winning money if you survive. Now, his plan at first is to try to get into one of the game shows that's a little bit safer, but along the way, he ends up proving himself a little too well, so the executive producer, Killian, decides that Ben is the perfect person to be in The Running Man. So when it comes to this particular game show, you can make a lot of money, but the only way to do so is to survive for 30 days. Now the problem is that you are running out into the world and using whatever you can find at your disposal to be able to run and hide. The problem is there's a set of hunters that are also on their way to try and find you and get you. So with all of the odds seemingly being against Ben, can he survive and win The Running Man? So if you were a fan of the original 1987 film, there are quite a few differences between this film and that one. Probably one of the most glaring ones that you're questioning is, well, wait a minute, why did they split up the character of Killian into two characters? Actually, that's how it was in the original book. Killian and Bobby T were completely separate entities, but for that first movie, they decided to combine it into one. Another somewhat big difference is the fact that the original 1987 film took place during 2017 and 2019, while this and the book take place during 2025. Now, I could keep going on and on about the differences, but there's at least one more I'll mention. If you, like me, were a big fan of the 1987 film, you're probably wondering, well, wait a minute, why are these stalker characters so bland when they were very extra and just kind of like almost wrestling personas or video game characters in that first film? Well, like I said, this is a lot closer to the original source material. Now, putting aside the differences between the two movies and just talking about this one for a moment, I really had high hopes for this. One, just due to the fact that it was Edgar Wright, and two, due to the cast. I mean, you had Glenn Powell, Josh Brolin, Coleman Domingo, Lee Pace, and a whole bunch of other very well known and familiar faces. So this really should have been really good. I think probably my biggest issue with this movie is it just didn't really know what lane it was in. There were moments that were really funny, and then there were moments that were super harsh and dramatic. And I just don't think that they blended the two well together in this version of that story. Had it moved more into a full on comedy action, I think it would have done well. Had it been a bit more serious with a couple of jokes thrown in, probably would have done better that way also. And I think that's the balance that the original film had because it was a very serious movie. But when you have Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the character, he's just so good at throwing out these weird one liners. And it may just be because it's Arnold, but they work, even though some of them are really dumb and ridiculous. They just kind of worked for his character. And I'm not just putting everything on Glenn Powell's shoulders. He did a good job as the character, and what he was directed to do, it, I don't know. At moments, it was a little boring. At other times, it was hard for me to connect to the actual character. But I don't necessarily feel like he was doing a bad job of the portrayal he was given. It's just how everything was portrayed didn't work, at least for me. In general, I really don't think it was a character issue because also Josh Brolin and Coleman Domingo did great jobs as their characters. Lee Pace was also good, but I really didn't like the mask that they chose. I think it's called a balaclava. It I don't know if it was just due to the coloration or just how it looked on him. It just seemed kind of silly and in no real way threatening or like, oh no, this person's coming after me. More than anything, I really just think it was the pacing and how the story actually played out and the choices on what moments were good for this type of genre and what moments were good for that type. So, altogether, I'm going to give this version of The Running Man a 2 out of 5. Now, I do still recommend checking this one out for yourselves because who knows, maybe you will enjoy it much more than I did. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. And if you already saw this version of The Running Man, let me know what you thought about it in the comments.